Thank you very much. I know you guys are very busy. My name is Mark Catchlove, and I lead the Miller-Knoll Insight Group, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, what that is. And I work for the Miller-Knoll organization, but I always give you guidance about how do you introduce this, because it's very confusing. This company doesn't make anything. All these companies are the designers and manufacturers of products for the home, for healthcare, for education, and what I'm going to talk about today is workplace. And what I'm going to share with you is very much research-led insights that we get through our research. And I'm part of a group called the Global Planning, Research and Planning Group. This is a team of people, and it is made up of researchers. One of our researchers was a nurse for 10 years and an architect for 10 years, which is an interesting career move. We have a team of strategists that work with clients. We have a team of designers that give ideas for some of the work, and then a team of insight sharers. And I'm part of that team, and there's 4 of us in that team and that global team. And we call global research and planning because we like to think of our history. And you may not know that actually Knoll and Herman Miller have a history of research. So in 1946, Florence Knoll started the first ever design group doing space planning. Up until that, no one had done it, and she was one of the first ones that kind of did client research, trying to understand how to design. That's pretty normal now, but here was the exception. And in the 1960s, this guy is a guy called Robert Probst. Have you ever heard of this guy? Robert Probst designed the first ever screen-based furniture system. He gets blamed for designing a cubicle, but he didn't design a cubicle. This is how he designed it. But eventually, cubicles were more efficient, and those horrible cubicle farms is not what he designed. So that's a little bit of background. And I want to share with you some of our thoughts around something that we call design with impact. And this whole idea that every design has an impact. The way this room's laid out has an impact. The way the office is laid out, the way a shop is laid out. It all has an impact. And what we started to do is try to understand what that means for place and what it means for people. And a part of our research was actually done with something called the Future Forum. That was Slack, Management Leadership for Today, Boston Consulting, and ourselves. And every quarter we would interview 10,000 people, question 10,000 people. And we found out some interesting data, which I'm going to share with you. But before we get to that, what I find interesting is that sometimes we concentrate so much on place, on generations, on age, that actually the most important part of everything we do is what? People. We kind of get hooked up on the price because that's pretty important. We get hooked up on, the space, the location, but all of that is people. And one of the things that we wanted to do is understand you, understand your parents, understand your children. And we went back to fundamental research because when you're designing places, you're designing for people. And my colleagues looked at research over 100 years to understand sociology, psychology, anthropology, and find out what is it that are fundamental human needs. What do you all need? And you'll see a lot of research about the generations at work. And I have to say that you go very careful when you read that, because why are we putting people in boxes? What we're doing here is our research relates to people, whether they're 6 or whether they're 96, whether they're a man or a woman, whether they're in Paris or Peru. This whole idea that these are fundamental needs, and to have impact, you have to think about these needs. Think about it yourself. So do some research on yourself as I'm talking about this. So we identified 6 fundamental human needs. If you used studied Maslow's hierarchy of need, you'll find a lot of similarity with that. Is my English clear enough for you, by the way? Good. Great. So one of the fundamental needs that we all want is a sense of safety. And safety has two levels. It's physical. So of course you're working with a company that does ergonomic chairs. That's really important. So that's physical safety. When you come in and walk around this area, you want to feel safe. But another area is what we call psychological safety. And one of my colleagues is a specialist on psychological safety. What I mean is, if this is my boss and I want to disagree with my boss, that's okay. That actually I want to challenge you, I want to question you, that's called psychological safety, where we don't feel like we're at the bottom of the pile, that we all feel like we are valued and our opinion is valued. And psychological safety is one of our fundamental human needs. By the way, if you're a parent, you'll see this for your children. If you're a leader, you'll see this for your team. I always say, if you want to start a criminal gang in Paris, this is why gangs happen. Because this is a fundamental human need. And if good society doesn't give it, bad society will. All of us want a sense of status. Now, I don't necessarily mean hierarchy, but because I work globally, sometimes hierarchy matters. But this is recognition. You've done a fantastic job last week. Well done. Thank you for that. And that's what we need, some kind of recognition. Now, money's important, okay? That reward is important, but just some kind of recognition. I always say, this is an amazing invention. You can put a little note and say, thanks very much for all the hard work you did. Doesn't it make a difference? That all of us want some kind of status. Another fundamental need is just a sense of purpose. What is it that we're all doing? What's our contribution? And purpose is one of those that actually affects our health. If ever you've been out of work, our purpose feels low and we actually get more sick. This is my challenge. I am an old guy. I'm thinking about retiring in the next couple of years. Where do I get this from? A lot of research shows that it's 5 to 10 years after someone retires when they die. So you've got to think because of this purpose. And you kind of go, yeah, but all we do is provide furniture and spaces. So how do we do that? Well, you help people achieve their purpose. But here's a problem. How you achieve and how you achieve is very, very different. So the space has to help us achieve. And it might be that it's too light, it's too dark. We all like different things. Another fundamental need is autonomy. Autonomy is just freedom to choose within a boundary. If there are no boundaries, that's anarchy. But all of us, and some people want a lot of autonomy and some people just want a bit of autonomy. That whole idea that we have a freedom of choice, that's why the return to office mandates are getting lots of challenges, because what we're removing is autonomy, some sense of freedom. And the final fundamental need is just a sense of community. I'm going to focus on that. Now, can you see what I mean about this is what your team needs? This is what your children need. I always say the autonomy one is the one as your children are getting older, you know, when they're really as old as 5 and they're no longer 3, they think they know more. And when they get to 10, they know everything and they want a little bit more freedom. I want that kind of thing. And that is a continuing thing. Can you also see what I mean by criminal gangs? So I've worked in youth work for years. I did youth work in a difficult area of London to give kids this. Because if I didn't give them this, bad society will. This is why gangs happen, because they get this from that. So I mentioned that we did research with Future Forum and we found out a few things which are of interest, I think, for you, that actually flexibility has now become an expectation. And a lot of it is because of these 6 things. But also the pandemic created this expectation, and everything that people said couldn't happen before the pandemic, oh yeah, you won't be able to work from home, the technology won't work, the security won't work, it did. So suddenly, whether companies give it or not, flexibility has become an expectation. And here's an interesting statistic. 81% of people interviewed, this is the 10,000 people, want flexibility in where they work. And that's our world. And that might be at home or in the office or somewhere in the office. But here's a bigger HR problem. And I say a lot of workplace is not just about place, it's about people. And one of the challenges is this, that 93% of people actually want flexibility over their time. Because this is what matters. And again, if you've got children, circumstances, have you heard of the sandwich generation? The sandwich generation is a generation where you have children and parents that you're possibly caring for, or even grandparents. And that actually having that flexibility around time, which we got used to during the pandemic, now that's being taken away. It's a bit like giving someone a pay rise and then you take it away from them. That's what's happened. You know, we've given them flexibility and now we're taking it away. That will have that negative impact. It also reduces that security that I talked about. So this is a real HR challenge, which is why on the projects you engage with, HR need to be around this. And I'm going to tell you some of the other challenges at HR over in a minute. But some good news. As an office furniture manufacturer and as office supplies, some good news is that 85% of people still want to go to the office. And we asked them why. And the reasons were this. First of all, collaboration, the pretty obvious one. But don't think of collaboration as one thing. It's actually, we call it a spectrum. So it might just be, how are you? How's the family? Yeah, how did your team do last night? You know, how will you get on at the gym? All that kind of, we call that chat, right through to the world is going to end and you and me are going to have to solve it. We've got to get everyone together, you know, all that kind of deep collaboration. And that actually people felt that that was better in person. Not impossible virtually, but better in person. Another thing that people want to come into the office for is just friendship, camaraderie. And that is really important, that actually we make a lot of connections and friends through work. There's also some research from Gensler that says that actually the office might be one of the few places we go where we make friends with people that aren't normally the kind of people we would mix with. Because we all live in a segregated society. You've chosen to live where you live because it suits you. So you get to know those people. You don't mix, whether that's to do with an income bracket, whether it's even a religious thing, whether you've kind of chosen to live because it works for you. Work might be one of the few places where you make friends with people that you wouldn't normally make friends with. In fact, university was a bit like that. You probably met people at university that you wouldn't have met normally. But camaraderie is a reason that people go in, both for introverts and extroverts, by the way. We've done a lot of research around introverts and extroverts. Introverts do like meeting people, but they want to be in control of who they meet, whereas extroverts just talk to everyone. I've got loads of friends. Introverts have a few friends. Then just being seen. So the boss is in, I'm going to be in. And in fact, a lot of research shows that the less you are seen, it's called proximity bias. When you're near your boss, you're more likely to get promoted. It's a big challenge for the Paris office because HQ is in America and a lot of this the team was run from London, and it's a big challenge to develop that whole idea of FaceTime. Then the final thing that people want to come in for is focus. And this is interesting actually, because a lot of people said, oh yeah, people will come into the office to collaborate and will focus at home. But not everyone has that amazing house at home where they can focus. You know, they haven't got the 5-bedroom house. They haven't got that situation where they can focus. Or some of you, have you got something like this? I call it a butterfly mind, where a butterfly lands somewhere and then it goes very, very quickly. And some of our minds are like that. And home is one of the worst places to be for people with butterfly minds. Oh, I must do that. Oh, I need to do that. Oh, what's that in the garden? I have to pull my blind. I've got 25 bird feeders in my garden. I'm obsessed with feeding the birds. I had a delivery last week. It takes me an hour and a half to put it all in the feeders and everything. But I have to pull the blind because what's that one? What's that one? Get the binocular. My neighbors think I'm weird looking out of my window with binoculars. But that's because some of us have butterfly minds. So, and there's that separation. This is home and this is work. And people do that to go to the office. And here's the thing, they're going to go to the office to do all of those things in the same time. You're not going to go to do just one of those things. Another piece of research we did with a workplace psychologist gave us an interesting statistic though. And by the way, I'll share all this research with you afterwards. This is a guy called Dr. Nigel Oserland, and he's a workplace psychologist. And he did a whole piece of research. It was called the enticing workplace. Why do people want to come back to the office? But he actually found an interesting piece of statistic. That assigned desk, people that have their own desk are happier than people that don't. So we asked them, what's better in the office and what's better at home? Anyone that had their own desk, everything was better in the office. Or compared to the people that had an unsigned desk. Much more happiness. And this is a challenge. Now, I'm not saying that every company gives everyone their own desk, because that's not going to happen. But this is the other HR challenge, that change management, and I'll talk a little about, is now a requirement. You can't just say, you can't take something away without explaining why you're doing that. And again, you do this with your kids. I'm going to take this away, but you're going to get this in return. We do this in our private lives really well. But this is a challenge. Everyone with me? So another piece of research that ties to this is some research that we did around place attachment. Whilst we can have relationships with people, we have relationship with places. So I don't know if you get the metro in or whatever, but a lot of people like to go into the same carriage. Yeah, you get out of the same, go to a restaurant, you like to sit at the same seat. When you're having dinner at home, dad sits in this seat, mum sits there. All of it's called place. Have you ever kind of been in an apartment for like a few years and then you leave and it's quite emotional? Or, that whole, we get attached to places. And that's one of the challenges with this. We actually get attached to places, even if they're bad. Someone called it the bad slippers syndrome, where you might have a pair of slippers, granny slippers, that are so bad that she's going to trip over, but she loves them. You bought me these when you were 7. Don't you remember? I've had them 30 years, and they're really bad. But we get attached to things, and it's a bit, place can be like that we have positive and negative reactions. If we can have place attachment, we can also have place detachment. If you've had a bad experience in a place, you often don't want to go back to it. So what we also found is we started to see what are the things that are better in person. Like this, for instance. I could have done this virtually, but this is much better in person. And just getting people together is better in person. Not impossible virtually, but the body language. This is interesting. The smells, the noises, all of it matters when you're in person. Reading the cues. It's like, did you ever, when you were doing online calls and then you met people in real life, they're either taller than you thought or shorter than you thought, or very different than you thought. A lot of people didn't realize I've got a fat belly because it was all, it was always my face. That whole idea. So they don't really know me. You get to know me better in person. The other thing is something called weak ties and strong ties. Let me explain what that means. Our strong ties are all the people that are in your team, that you work with together all the time. Our weak ties are the people in the other teams who are important for you, but you don't connect with enough. And that happens less virtually. And we work with a researcher called Dr. Andreas Hofbauer, and he said this: most knowledge in an organization travels through our weak ties. And why is that? Because if you're in my team, I assume you know what I know. But if you're not in my team, I tell you things because you're not in my team, and I thought, well, do you know this? Do you know that? And weak ties can be everything from the receptionist, the barista, it can be, but often it's people in other teams. And a lot of teams don't work with themselves, they work with other teams. And this is better in person. Just collaborating, peer-to-peer collaboration, and getting feedback and mentorship. This is why a lot of lawyers, a lot of professional firms are asking graduates to come into the office. And graduates are asking to come into the office to get this. Your career development matters. So much of what we learn by observation from a very young age. Have you ever seen like dad walking along like this and the little boy is walking along like this? We just copy things. That goes on through our entire life. And you will be using terms in a presentation that you heard someone else use in a presentation, because you're getting feedback, you're being mentored. That is so much better in person. So I have a team member in Bangalore. I employed him virtually. 6 months we worked together virtually. I met him, and that week together was much more advantageous than that whole 6 months. And then just developing your career is better in person as well. And the other thing about being in person is just the culture as well. This whole idea that culture matters. That is what really matters. This whole idea of making a difference. It's the culture is better in person, because it's a false culture virtually. Culture is just the way things are done. So we've talked to a lot of clients, and one of the things that we've tried to find out is, what are the challenges? So we try to discuss with clients, what are the challenges? And we came up with a list of things which may be of interest here. So these are some of the things that when we talk to clients, and by the way, the size of the circle doesn't mean it's less or more important. All of these things are the challenges that clients are going through. It might be things like developing talent. Biggest cost of a company is people. So what's the point of employing, you might be the best people that I can employ. How do I develop that talent? And this is a huge challenge for organizations, particularly in the current climate. The second biggest cost is real estate. So lots of companies haven't got a clue at the moment what to do. They want us to tell them what to do, which that's not the way you do things. Do we need more space? Do we need less space? Are we in the right area? Do we need to give a desk to everyone? I do know in London, in the central London, there's a very large investment firm, 2,000 people, everyone is getting their own desk.
Have they tried differently before?
They tried differently before. They're coming back. 45% of the space is taken up with cellular offices. That's crazy. But they've gone through this. That to them is optimizing real estate. So they're spending more to do this, retain the talent. And I remember once I was in a seminar, talking about space and how you might want to reduce it. And one guy from a law firm said, if a lawyer's earning us 5 million euros a year, they can have what they want. And that's the same with this big investment company that's in the center of London. Another one is this flexibility I talked about. Do you know what the easiest way to deal with this is? Ignore it. That's what a lot of companies, those big companies, saying everyone back to the office, because this is really difficult to manage. Whether that's flexibility in time and place, it's just easy to say everyone comes in, it's 9 till 5:30, 5 days a week, and that's the way it is. That's the easy way. But of course, we know in the time zones, I can be on a call at 6 a.m. in the morning. I'm not going to work till 6 a.m. at night if I'm up and working at 6 a.m. Flexibility is one of those challenges. And the other thing that we're seeing a big challenge is around staff engagement, where people feel like they're going to connect to the company. This is what helps people stay longer. That whole idea that people are connecting. And that, we felt, when we started looking at this, we thought we could put this into 3 buckets. And those 3 buckets are well-being, connection, and change. And that, to me, is kind of just sums up all the challenges that companies are going with, is well-being, connection, and change. And we think that if you do that, you can actually design with impact. And impact is an interesting term. It's making a difference. By the way, you can make a negative difference as well. Every design has impact. And we impact people's lives. And I kind of put this to you that actually what you do impacts lives. Because if you give someone a good day at work, have a guess what? Their children have a good night at home. I know none of you are like this, but when you have a bad day at the office sometimes, your family know. Yeah. Maybe not as understanding or as patient as you might be. So let me go through those three things. Well-being. Well-being for us is a term which is used a lot. I mean, I went to an exhibition recently and I saw this company called the Well-being Company. And when I looked at what they did water dispensing. So it's kind of a term that's been hijacked. So let's try and understand what well-being means. Well-being, we talk about holistic ergonomics, complete ergonomics, that to get it right, there's three areas. Physical ergonomics, which is the one that we all talk about in offices, whether that's chairs, desks. But the other thing we talk about is social ergonomics. How do you plan spaces so that those weak ties and strong ties, those connections that people meet? And our latest piece of research is around something called relationship-based work, because we think social ergonomics is not about the activity, just about the activities you do, it's who you work with. And the last piece of ergonomics we call cognitive ergonomics. This is how space, I heard it's called geo ergonomics as well. It's basically how a space affects us. Go into a shop for one thing, come out with 10 things, they've succeeded in impacting your cognitive ergonomics. Light, color, noise, textures, boundaries, views, all impact us. That's a part of our well-being. I just checked into a hotel this morning. I thought, this is odd. The window's all frosted. Why is that? So I managed to open and I realized why. Because there is no view. It's the view of a machine, I think, right outside. That makes a difference to our experience. What are views? That whole idea that cognitive ergonomics matter. The other thing that helps with our well-being is being heard, being given a voice and a choice. Now, here's a challenge here. So I'm working on a project for 800 people. It's really difficult to ask every one of those 800 what they want, but we have to give them a choice. And my colleague Joseph, he said we should stop designing for people and start designing with people. And that is a challenge. Trying to find out I see so many places where people aren't consulted, and it's beautiful, but it's not actually how the people work. So giving people a voice and choice. This is another area that we think is really important for people's well-being. It's hospitality. Now, that's more than just food and drink, although that matters. You know, I'm in a country where food and drink is really important, but it's the whole experience of how welcome, how valued. So I'll give you an example. Have you ever been to one of those amazing restaurants, which is like an award-winning restaurant, where the food is fantastic, but you wouldn't go back? Another one where you probably go to a little local cafe. It's not going to win design awards, but the hospitality, that whole experience is, you really feel like you're important. Often happens when you go on holiday. You find a little cafe and they make you feel so important, you go back there again and again, or a restaurant. That whole idea that hospitality, and we've done some research around this, hospitality has a really strong history in religion. Even the word communion is about hospitality, it's about eating. And I often say, actually, if you think of your favorite day in your entire life, there was probably food and drink. Hospitality.
To get back to the previous one, how do you give voice and choice to end result?
Yeah, so this is where the working groups start to come in, and it's groups and subgroups. And it is trying to understand, team leaders need to understand their team if they're being consulted. And here's the challenge. A lot of leaders don't know what their teams do. And so it's if you don't do any of it, then nothing's going to work. But it is having working committees, listening committees. I'm afraid a lot of people hate them, but just surveys. They still are important. What do you do? And one of the good old things is observation. And that, a lot of AI and a lot of even sensors, a sensor can tell you a room is being used. It can't tell you how successful was the use of that room. Did it work or did it not work? And that is, so a lot of it's a lot of surveys, a lot of representatives, team leaders. The other thing is, I've got a good friend called Neil Usher, and he wrote a book. And he said this: every workplace is in a beta mode. Beta mode. In other words, it's never finished. So the idea is you do what you can and be prepared to change it and adapt it. That's why we're seeing much more flexibility in space, so that you can adapt it and change it. The other thing that we all need is just time to rest, time for respite and restoration, just to have a rest. This might be the most important 10 minutes of your day. Sometimes we need a bit of silence, just a bit of rest, taking a difficult phone call, just finished a piece of work that's exhausted you and you just need 10 minutes. Might be a walk. I tend to go for a walk. Might be a view out a window. Might just be sitting in a chair where no one's going to interrupt you. We're seeing a big growth of biophilic design, but it's much more than just plants, by the way. It's textures. Smells are having an important part in workplace. Views, that whole idea of biophilic design. Then we start thinking about connection. Remember, people are coming into the office for camaraderie, and connection matters. One of the challenges is if people are working virtually, how do you get large groups into the building? How do you manage spaces like this? A bit like we're doing here. You know, this is a flexible space where you get people in. We're seeing many more businesses having large gathering areas as well. Then, if I can't have my own desk, I want my own neighborhood. So the idea is that when I go in, I'm going to be by my friend, somewhere nearby, we're in the same neighborhood, or somewhere near my team, that gives me that sense of connection and sense of ownership. And then we got to support impromptu connections, because remember, a lot of our knowledge travels through our impromptu connections. And a lot of what we find out, I call it bump knowledge, where we bump into someone and say, well, have you heard this? And it's those little chats matter. The other thing that's important is what's going on in the business. We all need to know that. So there are some companies that will either, and by the way, you might publicize it on an intranet, but no one looks at your intranet. Research shows that we've got the most amazing intranet, really. It's one of those where it's just what's happening, what's going on. And so people are still using analog ways of, and designers do this a lot, where they kind of publicize what projects are happening. And then I mentioned this, that actually connection to leaders, because we all want to be seen. We want to see our leaders. We want to make sure that they're accessible. And then we've got to think about those collaboration options. There isn't one type of space, but I can tell you this, most projects now that were done 5 years ago have too many big rooms and not enough small rooms. Because most collaboration is 2 or 3 people, not 20 to 30 people. That's a huge challenge. And then of course the technology has to be upgraded, because a lot of the technology doesn't support this new hybrid world. Human beings are neurologically wired to seek positive social experiences. These encounters stimulate the brain, making people more cooperative and caring towards others within the group. Paul Zak is a neuroscientist, and he looked at the whole subject of oxytocin and trust and connection. Now, if we are neurologically wired to seek positive social experiences, we will also avoid negative social experiences, which might be a reason people don't want to come into the office. So that's Paul Zak. I'm going to jump that one. And the last thing I talked about was change. And change is absolutely, if anything's going to happen in the future, I can guarantee it will be change. But I don't know what that change is. That's the challenge. But what we started to see is participative design. If you want to manage change, remember what I said? You design with people, not for people. Again, we do this in our family. You know, if you've got kids and they want to decorate their bedroom, get them involved. They'll own it more. This is also in social housing. You'll see a lot of research shows when people are involved with designing their own social housing, the crime rate goes down, the involvement goes up, because all of us can be involved. That is really good for change management. What we're also seeing is a lot of pilots now, tests. We're kind of used to doing mock-ups, which is maybe 4 desks or whatever, but now we're seeing almost whole scenarios where companies are trying to work out what works for them. Whether that's more collaborative, more social, more private spaces, lots of piloting to help manage that change as well. And one thing we're seeing now is a variety of options. And of course, activity-based working is a term that was used by Veldhoven. Still valid, but I'm going to challenge whether we need to add to that a little bit in a moment. But variety of work settings. And we're seeing a lot more modularity, both in the layouts and in furniture, and the ability for users to adapt. The trouble with this, so this is a product that we designed with user adaptability called OE1. A lot of facilities managers aren't keen on user adaptability because they might move it in the wrong place. And then, of course, there is this whole psychology of change management. It's a psychology in its own right. Just because you're a great designer doesn't mean you're a good change manager, by the way. Change management is more than just saying you're going to get this. There's some great research around change management. One of my favorite quotes is that we overestimate what we're going to lose and we underestimate what we're going to gain. And sometimes we don't know what we're going to lose and what we're going to gain because no one knows. They haven't done all that research. Change management matters. I love this quote. Human organizations have always been natural places of change, reflecting the organic nature of life. What is different now is the pace of change and the prospect that it will come faster and faster. That was written in 1968 by Robert Probst, the guy that I mentioned that was our head of research, Herman Miller's research in the 1960s. In that book, he talks about the war of communication devices in 1968. That one organization is different from another. But what he also talked about is that historically, businesses are used to evolutionary change. What technology did and is still doing is revolutionary change. If there's a project that's 2 years away, no one's ordering the IT yet because it'll be out of date in 6 months anyway. So it will be faster and faster. And so we think that you do that. What you do is you start to think about settings that might support some of this. I haven't got much time to go through some of these, but what we started to do is think about settings that might support well-being, connection, and change, where we have cafes and forums and lounges. And I'm just going to quickly kind of go through some of these slides. Places where people can be on the edge or in the center. And this is really interesting. A lot of introverts still want to be included, but they don't want to be right in the heart of it. This is a combination of privacy. If I'm sat here, I probably don't want to be interrupted. If I'm here, I want to be in the middle of it. Cafes, really important. And by the way, this isn't necessarily just a cafe. It could also be a forum as well. Forums where you have a lot of flexibility in the space, a bit like this is. This is called our forum, where you can amend it and change it as well. And then kind of lounges, interesting psychology around a sofa. This whole idea that actually, so if we're chatting to clients and we want to find out what it is they want, a table in the way is a barrier. Sat around a sofa, it's much more relaxing. It makes a difference. And then we're seeing change in conference and meeting rooms where it's much more flexible. Technology is improved. It doubles as kind of very casual or formal space. We're also seeing neighborhoods where collaboration can start to happen and then workshops where there's a lot of flexibility. And here we talk about being able to change in minutes, days, and minutes, hours and days. Sometimes the minutes is where the staff might change it themselves. The hours is where they might be able to do it themselves. The days is where the facility team might have to come in as well. And then I mentioned private offices are not dead. They are still available, still around. They're just often doubled up as meeting spaces as well. You know, there are definitely less, but Noel we're doing one project in London with 2,000 people, as I mentioned, and a lot of those are offices that look very similar to that. The other thing that we're seeing a growth of is study halls or libraries. And this is for focus. These are areas, because this is space effective, we can't give everyone a booth. We can't put a booth, there's one round the corner. We can't give everyone a private office. So what you do is you create a space with guidance. In this area, in this study area, no phones, no video calls, no interruptions. A lot of us, when we say we want privacy, it's not confidentiality, it's just I don't want to be interrupted. Psychologists have studied interruptions. If I interrupt you, it takes you 23 minutes to refocus. That's why when I turn off all notifications, when I want to concentrate, emails, we're just working with a psychologist at the moment. She's a techno-sociologist, and that we get something like how many 100 notifications we get in a day. And already your phone, some of you can probably feel your phone buzzing now. And that is, anxiety. So the best way is just not to be interrupted. And this whole idea that if I'm here, I've chosen to sit here so that I'm not interrupted. And then I mentioned restoration. It's places where we can go and rest. So I just wanted to mention a new piece of work that we're starting to look at, is this whole idea that it isn't about activity-based working. It's about developing and growing relationships. And in fact, that none of us work alone. Even if you're an independent, we always work with other people, whether that's our clients. It's all about developing relationships. So activity-based work is not dead, but you have to lay aside, alongside the activity, you have to look at what relationships look like and try to understand the interaction. So community is one team connecting to another. That's where all those weak ties, really important. Group is the team itself, and then how we work with ourselves, how we connect and disconnect with ourselves. And we started to look at two types of work. Exploratory work, where we exchange and reflect, or the producing. It's quite simple, talking about it and doing it. So you'll go in a meeting, you're talking about a project, and this often happens, but you have to go away and do your bit, you've got to go away and do your bit. And then at some point, you're going to come back and do a little bit more talking about it. And this is relationship-based work. You can do that across teams, in your own teams, and then some of the time you're doing it on your own as well. And so we started to think about, and by the way, this is a piece of work, not a table, that it might be that we socialize first of all, we get to know each other. We work with a psychologist who said that to trust people, you have to get to know them. So you have to socialize before you start getting involved and actually working on a piece of work with other teams. There's a lot around the issue of trust. We've got to meet, the group might be being presented the work, or they might be working on the work. There's some great work one of my colleagues did around the makeup of teams, a bit like musical groups. Might be jazz, where that's quite informal. Might be an orchestra, where it's completely controlled. Might be studio musicians, where they're doing it in different parts of the world and it all comes back together. I thought that was quite an interesting way of putting it. And then the individual, where sometimes we're focusing, and sometimes the best way to focus is to separate yourself from a piece of work. Have you ever done that, where you're struggling, go for a walk, come back, and suddenly it happens? Or worse, is just as you're going to sleep at night, because you've forgotten about it, suddenly you think, always have a notebook beside your bed. Or I was going to say, send yourself a a message on your phone. You shouldn't have a phone in your bedroom. But anyway, so we started to think of settings a bit like that I've shown you that can support that. So I'll share with you some of our thoughts around that relationship-based work. So what we're saying is that we know people are going to work in different places. Our job is to make sure that the office is the preferred place and of greater value. That's a big challenge. We've got to make the office like a magnet where we want to choose, that's where we want to go. And that way we can focus on this whole subject of well-being, connection and change. So DJ Dupree started Herman Miller in the 1920s. He borrowed money from his father-in-law, who was called Herman Miller. If you've got rich in-laws, it's always good to acknowledge that. And he helped them. But this guy was an amazing people-focused person. He said that in the long run, all businesses and business leaders will be judged not by their profits or their products, but by their impact on humanity. And we are in an industry where you're not doctors, you're not nurses, you're not heart surgeons, but your job is to stop people needing doctors and heart surgeons by creating environments where people are happy and it makes a difference. Place has impact. Every place has impact. Let's make sure it's a positive impact. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you, Cecile, for joining us as well. Good to see you.
How is this concept of relationship-based work?
We started talking about it about 4 or 5 months ago. The concept we think's always been around. This is not new. And in fact, if you go back to that book in 1968, he even talks about designing spaces to connect teams. But I think what we're trying to do is bring it down not just to teams, but it's a human connection, that it's about who you work with inside the business and outside the business. So I'll give you one of my favorite examples that we never work alone, okay? Often designers don't get the credit for their work. So I'm going to ask you I want you to think of your favorite song of all time, okay? I'm not going to ask you to sing it. Your favorite song. Now think of the name of the person that sings the song, okay? Think of the name of the person that wrote the words. Think of the person that wrote the music. Think of the person that arranged the music. Think of do you see the point I'm trying to make? Is actually often at the front is this person that gets all the credit, a bit like I am now. But the reality of most work is it's never a single person's work. You know, even an artist has gone to get the right paint and often talks to a paint supplier and all those kind of things. It's their final work, but they work with a paper supplier, you know, that kind of thing. So that's why we started to think more and more, actually, it's not just what you do, it's who you do it with. And that is going to become important as we move forward. When I talked about this whole idea that we do things out of a sense of belonging. So it's a new piece of work and we're still developing it. We're going to be doing some relationship-based planning tools where you can run workshops and work out what teams connect with who. And this is not new. A lot of observational tools do that. The trouble is with technology is it might say how many people are in that room, but it won't say there were 3 different teams represented in that room. I remember Tim Oldman, who runs Leeseman, said this, that we can know what, but not why. That a lot of the time we know what's going on in a room, but why? Is it happening in that room because there's nowhere else that's private like that room? Or is it because that room is just the best room? But what if that room's only used once a month? Does that mean we get rid of it? Because what if Cecile and I have a meeting every month, we're at a meeting, and in that meeting, it's amazing what happens in that meeting. We solve a few problems. Somehow that room works for us. There's something about it. Do we just take that away? So often we make it based on data of what and not the why. And that's what we're trying to do, is observe relationships.
Did you talk about work at home?
Yeah, so here what I'm also saying is that work at home is not dead. All we're saying here is that if people are going to the office, we've got to make it a better experience, and so we're definitely work from home is still important, still under-resourced, still bad ergonomics, still not well supported. But what we're saying is if companies want to attract people to the office, it's got to be better. We've got to give people a reason to come to the office, and that's often people. It's people. But yeah, so working from home we've got retail divisions now. In fact, we just opened a retail space in Paris because we know that home working is still important. And in fact, if you go to mkinsightgroup.com, there's a whole host of advice from working from home. But there are some downsides. Often people don't have great ergonomics at home. The company hasn't invested. We work harder at home sometimes than in the office because we don't switch off. We did an online survey where 38,000 people continually did a bit of survey. 20% of people said the only time they moved is when they needed to go to the toilet. That's kind of scary. And so it is a challenge, but working from home is still, and we do a whole lot about that. But today is very much about how, if you want people to come into the office, you just got to make it a better place.
Very few others sit stand there.
Sorry?
Probably very few others sit stand.
A lot more now. A lot more because it's become much more affordable. If you remember, sit-stand, the mechanisms are quite expensive, but they have become, scarily, you can buy them quite reasonably on...
Space.
Sorry?
Space.
Exactly.
Either of specific room or a corner in the sitting room or in Delhi. It's not always possible.
No, and that was what we found from this research. A lot of people didn't have a dedicated space, or they're sitting on a sofa all day. Bad lighting is often, bad ergonomics. And the other thing is, so we do a lot of work in India, Mexico, where there are multi-family houses, multi-generations. So they don't want to work from home. It just doesn't work. And it might be so. During the pandemic, we had people that asked to come into the office because they were sharing apartments with 4 other people. The Wi-Fi was being used up. They were having to work from their bedroom. So a lot of people don't have these amazing houses where they have the space, but sometimes it's a convenience choice rather than ergonomics choice. And there are some countries now give companies legal requirement. If you have people working from home, you have to make sure that it's set up well. Huge challenge. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm aware I've gone over time, and thank you.